Hello, everyone. This is World Review with Ivo Daalder, a weekly look at news from around the world, produced by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It's Friday, August 23rd. We're live from Chicago, where the Democrats just concluded their convention. The race for the presidency is now on, and the outcome will be as consequential for the United States and the world as any election in American history. Here we will discuss the convention and the state of the race, but also go see how people abroad are looking at the race. Then a look at Kamala Harris's foreign policy. And finally, of course, we couldn't have another week without talking about Gaza. So we're going to talk about the latest in the ceasefire negotiations. Here to talk about these issues are three reporters who cover these stories. Matt Kaminski is the editor-at-large at Politico. Matt, great to have you here in person. Ken Moriyasu is the Washington correspondent for Nikkei Asia. Great to see you here too. And last but certainly not least, Macarena Vidal, who is the Washington correspondent for El País and is joining us this week for the first time. Let's get started. Wonderful that we could do this in person. We do have a live studio audience, but we're going to keep the conversation here, at least for a while. Macarena, let's start with you. You were on the floor last night and every day. This is an American spectacle, conventions. What are you telling your readers back home about this convention and what is happening in the nature of the presidential race?
Well, the takeaways for our audience was that it was really a show. We were waiting for Beyoncé. She did not turn up. It's a pity. But seriously, that Kamala Harris did what she had to do. She presented herself as a stateswoman. She left the public, the Democrats, really enthused. Now it's the real work that starts. She has done the easy part. She has presented her program, and now she has to go and convince the public in general that she is ready to lead and that she can win this election.
So I think the rumor that Beyonce was going to be there was in order to increase ratings on the TV. I mean, she would have perhaps even stole the show away from. And by the way, I was waiting for Taylor Swift, but
someone joked that you were going to a Beyonce concert and instead Leon Panetta showed up. This is what ended up happening.
So we were doing bets in the press room whether it would be Beyonce or Taylor Swift. But,
and then somebody said George W. Bush was supposed to be showing up too. And I don't know whether that would have done anything for Panetta. Might have been better. Ken, what are you telling people back home about what happened?
Well, so all the ambassadors of every country was here, looking at every word and taking what they can. As you say, it was a spectacle. And I'd like to focus on Michelle Obama's speech, which by far was the best speech of the convention, with the line of the 2024 election about Trump looking for a black job. I talked to speech experts about what makes Michelle Obama's speech so special. And this person told me it's the way she pauses between the sentences. And although all the script is on the teleprompter, she speaks as though she's actually thinking while she speaks. So that's her magic. But that's on the surface. What's more important to me and to the diplomats who are watching is what she said. And Michelle Obama did not mention Joe Biden once. And it was all about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And I think it's the Obamas are passing the torch, their message of hope, not to Biden, but to Harris. And that tells us that there is probably, the Democratic Party is not one and unified. There are multiple strains, teams, factions, and they have not really settled on a path forward. And if that's the case, this is interesting, possibly worrying for allies like Japan, because one of the things that Barack Obama said the most important thing I think that Barack Obama said is that we should not be the world's policeman. This is what he said during his presidency, which was shocking then. But since then, the world has changed quite a bit. And for him to continue to say that is very interesting for us, because allies want America to be the world's policeman. And then Kamala Harris came out on stage, and for the first time since being endorsed by Biden, she laid out her foreign policy stances, which were very forceful, much more forceful than most diplomats expected. So that was reassuring. But she did not mention China in a meaningful way. There could be that she's focused more on Europe, which would be troubling. But it could be that this morning, it was announced that Jake Sullivan is going to China for the first time to arrange a meeting, probably between Biden and Xi by the end of the year. If Kamala Harris's non-mention of China was coordinated with the Biden team, that kind of signals continuity and coherence, and that would be a welcome sign for allies.
Matt, how did you look at the convention and take it away?
I mean, it was the most extraordinary political event I've ever been to, and I think she is an extraordinary political phenomenon, not because of necessarily who she is, but of the circumstances we are in. She's been in public life for 20 years, and she is the least defined presidential candidate that we've arguably ever had, at least in our lives, in our sort of lifetime, and probably going back a lot further. Part of it is because she didn't run a primary, didn't have to. Part of it is because people just really don't know her. So this is really a chance for her to go out. I think she has continued to try to sort of define herself as a person, try and neutralize the attacks that Trump was throwing at her. She's stupid. No, actually, it was a pretty serious speech, and she clears command of the issues. She's exotic, kind of weird. What's that name? Is she even black? Is she Indian? She laid out her life story very effectively, and I think that she did sort of put forward an argument against Trump that didn't feel hysterical, but again felt serious. I thought the last day and a half, especially with the Waltz family, I think the beginning was, very much the new Democratic Party, and the old Democratic Party with Obama as the sort of superstars. The last day and a half was really it was aimed clearly at the centrist voter and meant to reassure people who are on the fence. And I can't think of anything, assuming these people still exist, but nothing she said in that speech I could imagine turning someone, no, Trump is right about her, I am going the other way. It was a really finely calibrated speech. And one last thing, it's really fascinating with Obama. Obviously, leitmotif throughout the week was the line from the Obamas to Harris, let's pretend Biden wasn't really there. The notion that she's not an incumbent. I mean, they made Trump to be the incumbent. She is this sort of challenger, an outsider even, a newcomer. But there is a huge difference between Obama and Harris. Obama was a movement candidate, and people were positively excited about him in the Democratic Party. The movement that is Kamala Harris is not Trump, and everything about what she is putting out there is designed to say, how do we defeat Trump? I wouldn't read too much into the speech. It really was fairly conventional stuff, but was notable but was not in it. And I wouldn't even say China, because there's a line in there about, we are at a moment in history where the fight between freedom and authoritarianism is the fight of our lives. I know which side I'm on. Which side are you on, Donald Trump? I think she was clearly also sort of signaling that on foreign policy is very much down the middle, but hard on defense. And the other line, last line, which I think is worth thinking, is going to be, the other side is denigrating America. That's a very un-Obama-esque line. Obama would never wrap himself in the flag. Obama was apologizing for America. That was the sort of rap on Obama when he was in office. This was a patriotic, I love America, I am American, we're all Americans, we're proud of America. I mean, this could have been, I don't know, it was just kind of Alice in Wonderland politically. The RNC, they were going on about, the working class and trade unions. And in this convention, they're going on about how wonderful America is, best country on earth. Let's be joyful and optimistic about it,
Yeah, interesting the way you put it, because the Obamas were claiming her as their heir, but in many ways she was claiming, in the patriotism, sounds a lot more like Biden. Biden's number one line, the line he repeated in the speech, and then he said when he withdrew was, "We are the United States of America, and together there is nothing that we can't do." And
Yes,
there is a
he's
but.
hectoring and he's negative about it.
No.
He's your old grandpa who's yelling at you about how good things used to be and how good things are, and why don't you appreciate it? She is like, no, this is a great moment.
No, exactly. But I don't disagree with it with that. But I actually think, the way I would put it is, yesterday she came out not as an Obama person or a Biden person. She came out as Kamala Harris. She was herself in some ways, and I wonder to what extent this convention was about remaking what the Democratic Party stands for. Yes, it's an anti-Trump movement, and that's for a whole bunch of reasons. But in some ways, it's also, Macarena, when you sit there, this is a different party,
It is.
and in many, many different ways.
Mm-hmm. It is. I was based here 10 years ago during the Obama administration. And I am always amazed to see how much it has evolved. As you said, it would have been unimaginable in the Obama years, all these screams of USA, USA, USA at the closure of a convention. I guess that on a way, it is part of how the whole politics of the United States have evolved to the right. But on the other hand, it also points to Kamala Harris that is trying to set herself as her own person, not an Obama person, not a Biden person. She is, a result of both administrations, but she is trying to mark that she's her own person, the same way that she's trying to mark that she's not there because she's a woman or because she's Black and because she has Indian heritage. She wants to be there because she's the best person and for the job. And as Nancy Pelosi said yesterday in an interview, the fact that she's a woman is the icing on the cake, but it's really not that relevant.
I see. I like that. And I think actually what's different, and we haven't talked about the Clintons, who of course were there too. What's slightly different is Clinton also made the case that finally the glass ceiling will be broken. And I think this convention was not about, I think that this was about a woman. It was about a person who was going to run the party.
And this actually speaks to, I think, generational difference. That for Hillary, it was really about the glass ceiling. 2016 was about our time has come, my time has come, and it's stolen from us. Whereas here, the subtext was a gender subtext, but it was not in your face, and it was not really about her gender. It was about her. And it's just one last thing about this. It's very interesting now in Europe. And I was just in Europe for most of last month. The most prominent and the most successful politicians happen to be women. Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, Giorgia Meloni, Mette Frederiksen. The weakest are Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz in Germany. So it is a kind of season of strong women. But there too, these are women between the age of early 40s up to 65. They're of the generation under Hillary Clinton. And Kamala Harris is of that generation under Hillary Clinton, where I think it's just more normal to have women in leadership positions. Therefore, you don't need to make a big issue out of it. But I know a lot of my women friends, that's the first thought on their minds when they were watching it last night.
Yeah, but I think the way you put it is exactly right. It's become normalized in Europe. It's in fact abnormal here because we've had too few women in the kind of leadership positions. But they're not making the case about normalization in the ways that Hillary Clinton. It's just, this is the way it is.
And as a woman, I have to say that it's very refreshing.
Yeah, no, No. I think that's exactly right. It's the growing up that we don't have to do that anymore. Of course, she would have to win. But
Oprah, Michelle, and Nancy Pelosi. There was the other most. I mean, Nancy Pelosi. We're at this moment because of her primarily, right? And so
yesterday, Nancy Pelosi came to the Foreign Press Center, and she was like, she's been described as the Queen of Dragons, but it was really the
not a dragon queen, I hope.
It was a packed room,
Yes.
standing room only, like 20 cameras. Everyone knew where the source of power was, and it was very fascinating to watch.
Yeah, but the torch has passed. Well, that's the convention. Ken, let's talk about what if. We have 73 days. We'll figure it out. The American voters will go out and do their thing. Then the election officials will do their thing. They count them, and hopefully the results will reflect what the intent was of the voters, and it will be accepted by all sides.
Lots of ifs.
There's a lot of ifs there, and I have a feeling we will come back to that theme at some point too. But let's assume for the moment that Kamala Harris takes the oath of office on the 20th of January 2025. The world wants to know first and foremost what does it mean for foreign policy. I must say I have had more calls from more journalists, including Ken, and many others about not only what will her foreign policy be, but who the hell is Phil Gordon? So other than the fact that he's been at the council and spoken here, he's a key person. But you've been thinking about the foreign policy. What do you think? What do you expect a Harris foreign policy to look like? How will it be the same? How will it be different?
So Phil Gordon, the National Security Advisor to Vice President Harris, his presence is both reassuring but also a little bit concerning for Japan. Reassuring because he's, as you told me, he's been in the presidential daily briefing for the entire period, along with the other principals. So he knows everything that Biden and Harris know. So there's continuity there. But he's also comes from a European background and a little bit of a Middle Eastern background, no background on Asia. So that is worrying. And those fears were accelerated with the publication of the Democratic Policy Platform, which was ratified on Monday. And there was a section on foreign policy at the very end of the 91-page document. And of course, we all go there immediately. And it starts with Europe. There's an entry on Europe, and then the Indo-Pacific, then China, then the Middle East, then the Western Hemisphere, and then Africa. And I was like, what? And everyone was like, what? Europe. And understandably, it was written before Harris was the nominee. So it is a reflection of the Biden administration, I understand. But the energy with which, the force with which the European section was written was much more forceful than what was written in the Indo-Pacific section. And what was written in the European section was that no other region has shown the importance of alliances than Europe, where the US has succeeded in rallying allies to confront Russia, and it has re-energized NATO. And it shows that the Biden White House and the Harris White House is very proud of its policies in Europe. And then it goes like Indo-Pacific is important too. Right. So that was our takeaway. Yesterday, like I said, Harris touched on foreign policy issues for the first time. She frames it, as you said, autocracies versus democracies. So we know where we are, and where she knows where she is, very important, and she knows where the United States should be. No interaction with dictators. So that was clear. A little reassured. So we're going through this phase of trying to understand where she is, and it'll be important who other people she brings into the foreign policy team to understand.
What are you hearing about that?
Well, so we've seen Susan Rice appearing at the Foreign Policy Press Center and on CNN every day. So we are wondering if she will have a prominent role. And if so, this would be very concerning for Japan, because when she was national security to President Obama, she was considered in Japanese eyes as being very pro-China. This morning, it was announced that Jake Sullivan is going to visit China next week. It will be the first visit since Susan Rice in 2016. And what happened on that visit? She got the red carpet treatment. She met Xi Jinping. And she was on the verge, I think, of embracing China's worldview, which is a new model of major power relations, which is China and US basically constituting a G2 and deciding the important things of the world, and Japan and South Korea just follow what is decided by the two. So this is a nightmare scenario for Japan. To her credit, at the Foreign Press Center briefing, Susan Rice called Xi Jinping an adversary, and that she said her views on China has changed because China has changed so much under Xi Jinping. So America has to adapt to that. So that's good. But we know where she started from, so there's a fear about that.
Matt, not a lot of foreign policy in the convention, not to be expected. You don't win elections on foreign policy these days. In fact, haven't since the 1940s in one form or another. What do you expect from Kamala Harris? How much continuity, how much change?
I mean, this is really what we're looking at. I mean, generally on Kamala Harris, and I think on sort of foreign policy, and we're left to guess. I do think, look, obviously she's going to pull from, I don't think Jake Sullivan's going to stick around. I'm sure Tony Blinken will not stick around. She will want her own team, her own people. She will obviously draw from familiar places, from probably Obama world, her own, but you know, her world is not that huge, especially not in the realm of foreign policy. A couple interesting things in the speech. I do think one, the really hard note on national defense, and this is where I think I wouldn't be concerned if I was Asia. I just don't think she's thought this through very much. China, even with Susan Rice, you know, 10 years ago might as well have been another century when it comes to China, since the U.S. policy has changed so dramatically and the world's view of China has changed so dramatically in the meantime. But if she is really putting forward a fairly hawkish internationalist, you know, believe in alliances, and everything again is defined against the other guy. We believe in alliances, not like him. We believe in democracy and we're going to support democratic leaders, not like him, because he loves Xi and he loves Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. I do also think there's an opportunity for her on Europe and on Ukraine for a fresh start. And to, you know, I think the Biden approach to Ukraine has been really marked by a lot of caution, and she would have a chance. She's not going to end the war in 24 hours like Donald Trump promises to do, but I think she can really lean into the tougher line. And that's the overall theme here. Remember, when Kamala Harris ran for office in 2019, she was muted on the one thing that she was strongest on and spoke about most confidently. I was a tough prosecutor, you know, and that at the time was completely unpopular. Fast forward 5 years later, Democratic Party is much more centrist. The party actually does believe in, you know, that law enforcement has got to do a better job. And I think that may apply to her foreign policy. Partly because Trump is going to try and define her that way as being weak and, you know, more left than, you know, Karl Marx. She, I think, is going to feel natural, and it actually comes naturally to her, that tough talk. You know, it's like, I am the prosecutor, and in the world, no one's going to push America around on my watch. And Biden actually is quite diffident, I think, on sort of foreign affairs, really quite cautious. And I see with her, at least rhetorically, a willingness to kind of lean in.
Macarena, how do you what do you see? How do you read the tea leaves?
Well, what I'm looking forward to seeing is how her policy towards Latin America is going to be, Latin America being a region of enormous importance to the United States that has somewhat been neglected, feels very neglected. And obviously, it has an enormous importance in the matter of immigration. It's going to be one of the hot potatoes in eventual possible Harris administration. The governments in Latin America are really watching what is happening. In places like in Brazil, there's been a certain disappointment that Biden is gone, but because Lula had a kind of affinity with him, not only in terms of age, but also in terms of union supporter. And in Mexico, of course, there's whatever happens in the United States is almost a local policy for them.
And a female president.
Exactly. That's what I was going to go to. That it's going to be the first time, if Harris wins, that there's going to be a female president in Mexico and a female president in the United States. So that's going to be interesting to see how the interaction evolves there.
Yeah, I think Latin America, and to the extent she has a foreign policy portfolio, it was Central America as part of the border, dealing with the root causes of the border. And she spent quite a lot of time thinking about how private and public investment in particular in Central America might be able to increase jobs. I think her biggest challenge is going to deal with Mexico and the border. The other one, of course, is going to be Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela is going to be a tremendously big problem because half the country has already left and the other half is about to leave. And there's only one place they want to go, which happens to be the United States. And how to deal with that is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think Mexico, I think we in this country so underappreciate the importance of the relationship with Mexico. That is the most important relationship we have, arguably, anywhere in the world. And it's certainly the most important relationship we have that we talk the least about. It's our biggest trading partner. It is now, there are almost 40 million Mexican Americans in this country. There are these deep cultural links. It has become the kind of industrial heartland for Silicon Valley, in the north. It is also the source of a drug that kills, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans, fentanyl, and it is a failing state at the same time. And Mexico is I think that the Mexican, that should be a foreign policy priority. And the reason why it isn't, I think, all kinds of reasons. One of it is that we were all raised to care about Europe or learn Mandarin or think about the Middle East. And I do think that this is the other shift that she could make because actually AMLO in Mexico, López Obrador actually really got along well with Trump. He's actually a Trumpist down there. I do think that Claudia Sheinbaum, who is genuinely left-wing politician, may find kind of that she and Harris could build something. The interesting thing about Harris in Mexico is that people down there say that she was tough. That Trump is trying to paint her as sort of failed border czar, whereas down there, well, she drove a really hard bargain on the border. So I think that's a really one that's worth watching closely.
I think that's right. Interesting. No one has mentioned the hottest potato, what people thought was going to be the hot potato in the convention, which was the Middle East. She did address the Middle East. I think for some people surprising in terms of how strong both her support was of Israel, and in some, yes, she did highlight the Gaza issue, which she has done, but there is this expectation that she was going to change the policy towards the Middle East. Ken, when you talk to people and when you write about her foreign policy, what's the sense there that her policy is going to be on the Middle East? We'll talk later about where we are, but sort of thinking through in the future.
Well, her campaign has been very careful on the messaging, so we don't really know, but it was, I thought it was genius yesterday, listening to her speech. The time that she allocated to speak about Israel and the time she allocated for Gaza, Palestine was exactly the same, around 38 seconds. She said 38 words. She said 38 words for Israel, 37 words for Palestine. So it's very calculated.
This is how journalists figure out.
But even more interesting, she said, let me be clear, twice. So if you take that out, she said more on Palestine. So, yeah, but we think, well, before the show started, you were talking about the Philadelphia corridor. Israel retaining control over the Egypt-Gaza border. This is the crux of the issue since the Gaza disengagement in 2015. Is Gaza free of occupation or not? And Israel would say, yes, there's no more settlements, no more Israeli troops. But the people of Gaza would say, no, it's an open-air jail because Israel retains control of the border. So whether that is lifted or not is the key. And I sense that Kamala Harris and Biden have a different opinion towards what is called the siege of Gaza.
I thought it was very interesting the way she put it in the speech, because I think she had previously been much more willing to criticize Israel, obviously, as vice president, and when was she, and I think after she had been anointed. But in the speech, it was, look, she articulated the policy of the U.S. government going back 30 years, basically. It was nothing that was surprising. What was interesting is, that line on Israel was firm and strong. That reassured the people who really deeply are worried that the Democratic Party is in hock to anti-Semites and then, but equally interesting, the lines on Palestine got twice the roar from the crowd. I mean, for me, that was striking, being arguably the loudest roar, except for the end, was for that line. So clearly that's something that, does move that base, which if you're a Democratic politician, you're very, very conscious of. And ultimately, this is about domestic American politics. I mean, we're going to talk more about the Groundhog Day, that's Gaza, but I think that was really an insight into where they are trying to manage those politics. And this week they say we did great. Barely any protests in Chicago. That was in the story. But college is coming back in the fall, and I think this may become a hot issue again domestically.
Macarena, Europe has and Spain in particular has taken a different line on the issue of Gaza. Spain has, I believe, recognized
Palestine as a state. Yeah.
Just as together with Norway and one other country,
Ireland as well.
And Ireland, in recent days. When I talk to my European friends, some of them are saying we're actually hoping for a change in policy. What are you picking up?
I didn't see that there's going to be much of a change compared to Biden. She, as you said, she spoke almost equally about Israel and Palestine. The language is certainly not the same, or the tone more than the language is not the same as the Biden administration. But I think that there is a limited margin in what she can do to differentiate herself from the Biden administration. She cannot make a break with Israel, certainly, but she was very forceful, I thought, yesterday about when she spoke about Palestinians. So. The hope, certainly in Europe, is that she will be a bit more or less inclined, like Biden in Europe, surprise for the forceful with which him aligned himself with Israel. So they are expecting Kamala Harris to be a bit more detached, but like I said, I think that there is a certain limitation on what she can do. But it was interesting to see that she talked about self-determination for Palestine. So that's the line that I think that shows what she may be planning or hoping to do.
We will have to see. We may, in fact, never see because Kamala Harris may not be president. There is that possibility.
By the way, that was the other interesting thing about the convention, that there was I didn't pick up any overconfidence among people. In fact, people felt in 2016 we were probably as happy as we are now, and look what happened. And the polls have been wrong. They were wrong in 2020. They understate the support for.
Yeah,
for
no,
Trump.
I think that was the key line from Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
We've been here before. Don't want to be here again. We'll see. Groundhog Day, you mentioned. Gaza is unfortunately Groundhog Day. The whole situation is there. The big change is that Tony Blinken went for his, I believe, 9th trip to the region, and came away from his conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu to say this is the last best hope for a ceasefire. Only to see that Hamas has now rejected the bridging proposal, and the bridging proposal itself was a different proposal than had originally been put on the table. Are we on the brink of war, Matt, because there is no ceasefire, or is somehow this rabbit going to come out of a hat, to really mix metaphors between groundhogs and rabbits? How do you see it?
I think every friend of mine who's been based in Jerusalem going back decades always ends the tour thinking it's the most frustrating place to work, because you're basically writing the same story over and over again, and it kind of doesn't lead to anything, and it's kind of hopeless. And that applies to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, yes, they've had sort of moments in '99, sort of attempts to actually get it solved, but we're sort of back to where we began. I mean, the basic problem here is, Tony Blinken wants a deal, and the Saudis sure want this to end because they want to normalize ties with Israel and sort of solidify a security pact with the U.S. against Iran. And the Qataris are, they're kind of playing both sides. The Egyptians want the things to calm down in sort of Gaza. So everyone except the two principals in this fight wants this to be over because they want to get on with their lives and do other things. Bibi Netanyahu does not want this to end until he can sort of say, I've leveled the place, and Hamas is been killed the way that we kind of eliminated Al-Qaeda and ISIS, or at least to a degree, even though all his military says this is impossible. And then Hamas itself, this is stuff that the Netflix show would seem far-fetched. Israel killed Mossad killed the Hamas leader in the guest house in Tehran. It's incredible. But kill him, and then you get the guy who's even worse. And so Hamas is sort of more dug in. So neither side really is really, and they keep moving the goalposts because they don't quite are ready to give up. And Hamas can't afford to really give up. Yes, they wouldn't mind some breathing room. I think the key is more not on the Hamas side, is on the Israeli side. At what point, we all assume that Bibi would be around for, October 7th is going to be on his tombstone, right? The prime minister who was in charge when the worst killing of Jews since the Holocaust took place. I mean, what a failure. Yet almost a year later, he is still there. So I think, and I think partly because the politics isn't right to remove him yet, and partly because the majority of Israelis do want the war to proceed forward, and so it's, again, talking about, it's repetitive and it's frustrating.
Yes, and our conversations weekly are repetitive and frustrating, but we come back to it each week because it's important. For one, because it involves a lot of human beings, and two, because it is a diversion in some ways. Just as you mentioned, everybody wants this war to be over. We have the most massive military capability right now deployed the United States, in the region. That has consequences for the rest of the world.
Absolutely. So as we speak, there are no American aircraft carriers in the Western Pacific, the East China Sea, the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, Sea of Japan, nothing. Usually there is a permanently forward deployed aircraft carrier in a place called Yokosuka in Japan. But this just happens to be once in a decade transition period where the Ronald Reagan went back to America and its replacement, the George Washington, was going to Japan. But for various reasons, including the delay in maintenance of the George Washington, there was always going to be a 2-3 month period where there was no Japan-based carrier. And we all knew this from 2 years ago. And the Navy's explanation was that, no, don't worry, we will send our San Diego-based carriers to the region during this time, so there is never a vacuum. So it did happen. The Theodore Roosevelt was in the Western Pacific while the Ronald Reagan was leaving Japan. But because what happened in the Middle East, Lloyd Austin sent Theodore Roosevelt to the Middle East. And so the Abraham Lincoln came from the San Diego, and that was also sent to the Middle East. So now we have nothing in the so-called first island chain, the second island chain. There's absolutely no aircraft carriers. So if China really wanted to invade Taiwan, this would be the perfect time, because the George Washington left San Diego yesterday. It's going to take 8 days to go to Yokosuka. It's guaranteed the next 8 days there'll be no aircraft carrier. So that's one.
There is an aircraft carrier. It's called Japan.
Yes.
We have a lot of airplanes there. But I think, and I hadn't actually realized this when Ken mentioned this to me a couple of days ago, that was the case. It does show that the urgency of the moment, and in this case, it's because of the possibility of Iranian strikes against Israel in retaliation to that assassination of the Hamas leader in Tehran itself, means that other security issues take a second seat. It's true in Ukraine, where the ability to provide Patriot and other capabilities to the Ukrainians is affected by the Middle East. It's also in the case of aircraft carriers and real military capability that comes with that in the Pacific.
Yeah, but I think we were always meant to sort of fight two fronts as a superpower, right? So this is where, if that's affected, maybe we should think about our sort of defense budget. One important point that I think just was reminded of, that focusing on the Philadelphia corridor or not, I think we're missing the bigger picture, which is what we're trying to do in the region is to check Iran and check Hezbollah, and the worst case scenario is a regional war, and no one really wants that. And I think Biden is effectively signaling to the Iranians, and Iranians are pretty risk averse. I mean, they know if something like this, they spark a wider regional conflict, that could lead to the collapse of their regime. And I think this is why you're not seeing any serious retaliation. They have to say they're doing it, but they have never really gone even within a mile of doing something that would lead to a wider war. And I think that's the thing too, obviously, we want to look out for. Unfortunately, Gaza is tragic. It's very bad for our politics here. It's very tragic for people who live there, but it is contained for now.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Macarena. And I think the Iranians have signaled, in fact, a statement from this week was that the retaliation will come, but it's not necessarily coming anytime soon. And we don't know, and it may not be in the same way that you think it would come. And some are reading that as hesitation, others might read that as cunning in one form or another. But it's clear that the moment doesn't seem to be quite ripe, except there's the Hezbollah issue as well. Europe looking at this, wants a ceasefire, wants this happening, but also has no real leverage to bring it about. So how are you reading the situation, and what do you think is likely to happen next?
Well, that's the $1 million question, or $1 billion question. Yeah. I don't know what will happen. We were expecting an attack 10 days ago, and it didn't happen. So I tend to agree with you, Matthew, about that they simply can't. I think that Europe is waiting to see how everything develops. I cannot see an attack happening right now for the reasons that you said. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I think the moment may have passed, although I still worry about Hezbollah and Israel. I mean, Hamas clearly would like this war to be spread so that the Israeli pressure on Hamas will lessen. And opinion polls are now indicating that Netanyahu is overtaking Benny Gantz, both in terms of popularity as prime minister and that his party will have a couple more seats.
He's the Rasputin of Israeli politics.
Well, he is, interesting analysis by pollster in Haaretz the other day was that what drives his popularity is tension and confrontation with Iran, because he is seen as the person who has both pointed to the Iranian threat and is able to marshal the necessary defenses against it. Hopefully, we'll have good news next week when we talk about the Middle East. But until then, I think this has been a really rich and wonderful conversation. I want to thank the three of you: Macarena Vidal of Al País, Ken Moriyasu of Nikkei Asia, Matt Kaminski of Politico, and I want to thank all of you, both here in the room and who are watching online or listening to our podcast, for joining us. We'll be back next week with another edition of Week in Review, the World Review. It is a Week in Review, but it will be World Review with Ivo Daalder. We'll be back next week. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful weekend.